What if I told you that the greatest transformation in life doesn't come from perfect circumstances, but from the most imperfect, painful moments? That sometimes we have to break to truly rebuild. This story isn't just about one woman. It's about all of us. It's about the struggles we face, the battles we fight within ourselves, and the resilience we discover when we decide that enough is enough. If you've ever felt undervalued, overlooked, or like the weight of the world was too much to bear, this story will resonate with you. Today, we're diving into the journey of Emily, a woman who turned her pain into power, her doubts into determination, and her fears into a fierce love for herself and her daughter. But this isn't just Emily's story. It's a mirror reflecting the strength we all carry within us, even when we feel at our weakest. By the end of this, you'll see that no matter where you are in your life, you are capable of rewriting your story. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just be the spark you've been waiting for. Emily's fingers trembled as she clutched the pregnancy test, her breath catching in her throat. For weeks, she had felt subtle changes, a flutter of exhaustion here, an unexpected wave of nausea there, but seeing the confirmation in her hands made it real. Her heart raced with a cocktail of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a quiet fear of the unknown. This was the moment she had longed for, yet it felt monumental, almost overwhelming. As the warm glow of the evening sunlight spilled into the living room, she rehearsed the words she would say to James. "We're going to be parents," she whispered softly to herself, imagining the smile on his face. When James walked through the door, Emily felt her pulse quicken. He looked tired, his tie loosened and his brow furrowed from the day's stress. But as soon as their eyes met, she knew she couldn't wait a second longer. "James!" she called, her voice quivering with restrained excitement. "I have something to tell you." He paused, sensing the gravity of her tone, and slowly approached her. "What is it?" he asked, a hint of concern laced with curiosity. Emily held up the test, her smile widening as the words spilled out, "We're going to have a baby." James's reaction was immediate, a burst of laughter and a warm embrace that enveloped her. "That's incredible," he exclaimed, his face lighting up in a way she hadn't seen in months. For a moment, the room was filled with pure joy, their shared excitement wrapping around them like a warm blanket. But as the minutes passed, Emily noticed a subtle shift. James's smile faded slightly, replaced by a thoughtful, almost distant look. This is going to change everything," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Emily's joy remained undiminished, her hands instinctively cradling her abdomen as she envisioned the future. She spoke eagerly about the nursery, the baby names they could choose, and how she couldn't wait to hold their child in her arms. But James's responses grew more measured, his excitement tempered by practicality. "We'll need to rethink the finances," he said, his tone suddenly pragmatic. "And, of course, there's your career. Are you planning to take a break?" His words weren't harsh, but they carried an edge of concern that felt out of place amidst her enthusiasm. Emily tried to brush it off, focusing instead on the happiness she felt, but a seed of unease had been planted. As they sat together later that evening, James made a comment that caught her off guard. "You'll have to be careful," he said casually, his eyes on the TV. "Pregnancy can really change a woman's body." Emily froze for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't what he said, but the casualness of it, as if her appearance was something he was already anticipating would shift in ways he might not like. She forced a smile, trying to dismiss the sting of his remark. Deep down, though, it lingered, casting a shadow over what should have been a night of unfiltered joy. The days following Emily's revelation were a mix of anticipation and unease. She poured herself into planning, her mind alive with possibilities. She browsed baby clothes online, imagined the soft pastel hues of the nursery walls, and caught herself daydreaming about tiny fingers wrapped around hers. But James's demeanor had subtly changed. While he still spoke about the baby with excitement, there were moments when his words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. "Do you think we're really ready for this?" he asked one night, his voice low and uncertain. Emily assured him they were, her own heart brimming with confidence even as doubt flickered in his eyes. One evening, Emily caught James staring out the window, his expression distant. She approached him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly. James hesitated before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything. The responsibility, the changes. It's a lot." Emily nodded, understanding his fears, but determined not to let them dampen her own excitement. She believed they could face this together, as a team. Yet, the shadow of his words lingered, a quiet reminder that their journey was only beginning. James's comments about her body also began to echo in her mind. She tried to shake them off, focusing on the happiness she felt growing inside her. But late at night, as she lay in bed, doubts crept in. Would he still see her the same way? Would the changes she welcomed with open arms, growing life, nurturing their child, be met with his quiet disapproval? Emily pushed the thoughts aside, refusing to let them take root. She knew that this was a moment to embrace fully, even if James wasn't entirely on the same page. As the weeks went on, Emily's optimism became her anchor. She resolved to focus on the beauty of this transformation, choosing to see her pregnancy as a gift rather than a challenge. Yet, in the quiet moments, James's lingering hesitations and offhand remarks were hard to ignore. Emily didn't yet realize how deeply his words would affect her, or the strength she would soon need to find. For now, she clung to the hope that their shared joy would outweigh their fears, even as cracks began to form beneath the surface. Emily's first trimester brought with it a cascade of changes, both physical and emotional. Her mornings began with waves of nausea that left her drained, and by the afternoons, fatigue settled in like a heavy blanket. Despite it all, she remained hopeful, cherishing every small reminder of the life growing inside her. But the changes in her body were undeniable. Her clothes began to fit more snugly, and her once boundless energy seemed to vanish overnight. She found herself leaning on James for support, hoping he would step into the role of a caring partner. Instead, she began to notice cracks in his demeanor. It started subtly, an offhand remark here, a teasing comment there. "You're really taking this eating for two things seriously," James joked one evening as Emily reached for a second helping of dinner. She laughed it off, but the words lingered, chipping away at her confidence. As the days turned into weeks, the jokes became more frequent, always veiled in a lighthearted tone that made it hard to confront him without feeling overly sensitive. "You've got that glow everyone talks about," he'd say, quickly adding, "though maybe it's just the extra shine from all the ice cream." Emily smiled on the surface, but inside, her heart ached. The turning point came during a dinner party with friends. Emily had spent the entire day preparing, determined to feel her best despite the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She chose a loose-fitting dress that once made her feel elegant, but now struggled to hide the changes in her figure. As the evening unfolded, she did her best to engage in the conversation, laughing and smiling even when her body begged for rest. But then James made a comment that cut deeper than anything before. "Emily's eating habits have been impressive lately," he said with a chuckle, earning a round of laughter from the group. Emily froze, her smile faltering as the room erupted in amusement. She forced herself to laugh along, hoping no one noticed the tears threatening to well up in her eyes. Inside, she felt exposed, as if her vulnerabilities had been laid bare for everyone to see. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which James had said them, the casualness of his insensitivity. For the rest of the evening, Emily stayed quiet, retreating into herself while the others chatted around her. When they returned home that night, Emily couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why would you say something like that?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and frustration. James seemed taken aback, his brows furrowing in confusion. "It was just a joke," he said defensively. "You know I didn't mean anything by it." But to Emily, it wasn't just a joke. It was a pattern, a growing collection of comments that left her feeling less than valued. "It didn't feel like a joke," she replied softly, tears brimming in her eyes. "It felt like you were making fun of me, of us." James sighed, brushing off her concerns with a wave of his hand. "You're being too sensitive," he muttered, turning away. Emily watched as he walked into the bedroom, leaving her standing alone in the living room. The silence that followed was deafening. She sat down on the couch, her hands resting on her growing belly, and felt a pang of sadness she couldn't ignore. For the first time, she began to wonder if James truly understood the journey they were on, or if he even wanted to. The realization stung, but deep within her, a small spark of determination began to grow. The night after the dinner party, Emily found herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. The dim light overhead cast soft shadows on her face, but her eyes were drawn to the changes in her body. Her hands instinctively moved to her belly, cradling the small bump that symbolized the life growing inside her. Yet, instead of feeling joy, all she could hear were James's words from the evening before, echoing like an unrelenting chorus. She turned slightly, examining her silhouette, trying to reconcile the person she saw with the image James seemed to have in his mind. A tear rolled down her cheek as memories flooded back. She thought about the promises James had made when they first fell in love. The way he had assured her she was beautiful, cherished, and loved no matter what. Now, those words felt like distant echoes of a man she barely recognized. She wondered how they had arrived at this point. Was it her fault for expecting too much? Or had James changed in ways she couldn't control? The questions spun in her mind, each one heavier than the last. Emily wiped her tears, trying to compose herself, but the weight of his insensitivity clung to her like a heavy cloak. As the night stretched on, Emily found herself slipping into a memory from years ago, a moment when James had looked at her with nothing but admiration. They had been on a spontaneous road trip, stopping at a quiet beach to watch the sunset. "You're the most beautiful person I've ever seen," he had whispered, his voice full of sincerity. That James, the man who saw her soul and not just her appearance, felt like a stranger now. She wanted to hold on to the hope that he was still there, buried beneath the surface. But each hurtful comment made that hope harder to cling to. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Emily glanced at the journal she kept on her nightstand. It had been months since she had written anything, her once constant habit of recording her thoughts replaced by the whirlwind of pregnancy preparations. But tonight, the need to express herself was too strong to ignore. She opened the journal, her pen trembling slightly as she began to write. The words poured out, her pain, her fears, her longing for the man she thought James was. As the ink flowed across the page, she felt a small sense of release, as if putting her emotions into words could help her make sense of the storm within her. When Emily finally lay down to sleep, her mind was still restless. She turned toward James, who was already fast asleep, his back turned to her. The distance between them felt more than physical. It was emotional, a chasm she wasn't sure how to bridge. But as she placed a protective hand over her belly, a new thought began to form. This journey wasn't just about her and James. It was about the tiny life growing inside her, a life she was determined to protect and nurture. For the first time, Emily felt a flicker of resolve, a quiet, yet powerful determination to prioritize herself and her child. The reflection she had seen in the mirror wasn't just a physical one. It was a reflection of her strength, her capacity to endure, and her desire for something better. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She couldn't allow James's words to define her worth. Emily fell asleep that night with a small yet growing sense of clarity. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing. Change was coming, and it had to start with her. The following morning, Emily woke up feeling a lingering heaviness in her chest. Yet amidst the emotional weight, there was a faint spark of determination that hadn't been there before. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had appeared. Perhaps during the quiet moments of journaling, or maybe when she felt her baby's gentle movements reminding her of the life she was nurturing. As she prepared breakfast, her mind wandered back to her closest friend, Claire, whose words had always been a source of comfort and strength. Maybe she'll have the perspective I need, Emily thought as she reached for her phone and dialed Claire's number. The call lasted over an hour, with Emily pouring out everything she had been holding in. She spoke of James's insensitive remarks, her own insecurities, and the mounting tension in their relationship. Claire listened intently, her voice warm and understanding as she responded. "Emily, you're stronger than you think," she said, her tone unwavering. "But you have to start believing that yourself. Take care of you. Not for him, but for you. And that little one." The words hit Emily like a gentle nudge toward clarity. For the first time in weeks, she felt understood, as if someone had handed her a map to navigate her feelings. That conversation with Claire became a turning point. Emily decided to take small steps toward reclaiming herself, her confidence, her health, and her happiness. She started with the basics, incorporating short, mindful walks into her daily routine. The fresh air and the rhythm of her footsteps provided a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. She began paying closer attention to her meals, not out of shame or to fit an image, but to nourish her body and the baby growing inside her. Meditation followed, a practice she had always been curious about but never committed to. Now it became her sanctuary, a quiet space where she could reconnect with herself. James, however, remained indifferent to her efforts. He noticed the changes but dismissed them with casual remarks. "You're really going all out with this self-improvement thing, huh?" he said one evening, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Emily didn't respond the way she once might have. Instead of shrinking under his words, she let them roll off her shoulders. She had begun to realize that his approval wasn't the measure of her worth. Every time she chose to focus on her well-being, it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that she had almost lost. Emily's newfound determination extended beyond her daily habits. She started setting boundaries, something she had always struggled with in her relationship. When James made another thoughtless comment about her appearance, she didn't stay silent. "I'm doing this for me and our child," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Your opinion doesn't define me." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, James seemed taken aback. He muttered a half-hearted apology, but Emily wasn't looking for validation. She was learning to find it within herself. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to feel lighter, not because life had suddenly become easier, but because she was choosing to let go of the weight she had been carrying for too long. She still didn't have all the answers, and the path ahead was uncertain. But every step she took, no matter how small, felt like a victory. Her conversations with Claire became more frequent, her walks grew longer, and her moments of self-reflection deepened. Emily wasn't just surviving anymore. She was slowly learning to thrive, and though she couldn't yet see the full picture, she knew she was building the foundation for a life that was stronger and more resilient. One quiet afternoon, Emily sat by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Her thoughts wandered to a message Claire had sent earlier that morning, a simple link to an online course on self-esteem and empowerment. It piqued Emily's curiosity, and with a deep breath, she clicked the link. The course promised tools to rebuild confidence and reclaim inner strength, exactly what she felt she needed. Without hesitation, she signed up, eager to immerse herself in something that felt like a step forward. It wasn't just about learning. It was about rediscovering the parts of herself she had lost along the way. The course introduced Emily to a virtual community of women, each with their own stories of struggle and resilience. As she read through their posts, she felt a strange mix of sorrow and hope. These were women who had faced challenges not unlike her own, and yet, here they were, sharing their triumphs, offering support, and building each other up. For the first time in months, Emily didn't feel alone. She began participating, sharing snippets of her journey, and receiving encouragement in return. The experience was cathartic, like opening a window in a room that had been stifling for far too long. Inspired by the stories of others, Emily decided to document her own journey. She opened a fresh notebook and began writing, the pages quickly filling with raw, unfiltered emotions. She wrote about her love for her unborn child, her disappointment in James, and the slow but steady process of rediscovering her strength. The act of writing became her refuge, a place where she could confront her pain and celebrate her victories without fear of judgment. Over time, those pages transformed from a record of her struggles into a testament to her resilience. What began as a private exercise started to feel like the beginning of something much bigger. The group also encouraged Emily to explore other avenues of growth. She began setting small goals for herself, completing daily affirmations, dedicating time to activities she once loved, and practicing gratitude even on her hardest days. Every goal met, no matter how modest, felt like a triumph. With each passing week, she noticed subtle changes in herself. A lighter step, a more confident gaze, a growing belief that she was capable of creating the life she deserved. It wasn't about perfection or erasing the pain. It was about moving forward, one deliberate step at a time. James, meanwhile, continued to observe these changes from the sidelines. His indifference had given way to mild curiosity, though he rarely voiced it. One evening, he walked into the living room to find Emily seated at her desk, scribbling furiously in her notebook. "What's all that about?" he asked, his tone more puzzled than dismissive. Emily paused, her pen hovering over the page. "It's for me," she replied simply, her voice steady and assured. For once, James didn't press further. He seemed to sense that whatever Emily was doing was beyond his reach, a realm where his opinions no longer held sway. The notebook became more than a collection of thoughts. It was the foundation of Emily's new reality. Through her writing, she found clarity and purpose, and through the community, she found connection and validation. As she reflected on her journey, she realized that the strength she was discovering had always been there. It had been buried beneath years of self-doubt and external pressures, but it was hers, waiting to be unearthed. Emily wasn't just healing. She was growing, evolving, and preparing for a future she could approach on her own terms. The tension in their household reached an unbearable peak one evening. Emily had just finished her evening walk, her cheeks flushed from the crisp air and her mind feeling lighter from the clarity it always brought. She walked into the kitchen, where James sat scrolling through his phone. She could tell by his expression that something was brewing. "You're really throwing yourself into this whole self-care thing," he said, not looking up. His tone was clipped, with an edge of sarcasm that made her stomach tighten. "But don't you think it's a little late for all that?" His words landed like a blow, sharp and cutting. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had grown accustomed to his offhand comments, but this one felt different. It was an attack not just on her efforts, but on her very essence. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. James shrugged, still not meeting her eyes. "I'm just saying, it's not like you can turn back the clock. What's done is done." Emily felt her resolve harden. She realized in that moment that she had reached the end of her patience. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. For the first time in their relationship, Emily decided she wasn't going to stay silent. She looked directly at James, her voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "I'm not doing this for you, James," she said, her words deliberate and clear. "I'm doing this for me and for our baby. And if you can't see that, then maybe you need to take a long, hard look at yourself." Her statement hung in the air, the weight of her words pressing down on both of them. James looked up from his phone, startled. He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, seemingly unsure of what to say. The silence that followed was deafening, but Emily didn't back down. She stood her ground, her hands resting protectively over her growing belly. In that moment, she felt a surge of strength she hadn't known was there. It was as if all the weeks of self-reflection, all the words she had written in her journal, had built up to this very point. She wasn't just standing up to James. She was reclaiming her voice, her power, her dignity. And though her hands trembled slightly, she knew she had crossed a line she could never go back from, and she didn't want to. James's reaction was mixed. Part confusion, part defensiveness, and part something Emily couldn't quite place. "You've changed," he said finally, his tone softer than she expected. Emily nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I have," she replied, "and I'm not going back to the person I was before." James looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up and left the room, leaving Emily standing alone in the kitchen. But this time, the solitude didn't feel lonely. It felt empowering. She had spoken her truth, and whether James accepted it or not was no longer her concern. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily felt the baby move for the first time. It was a small, fluttering sensation, but it filled her with a sense of purpose and joy she hadn't felt in months. She placed her hand on her belly, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. The breaking point wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning. Emily wasn't the same person she had been at the start of this journey, and she was finally okay with that. The day Lily was born, everything changed. Emily held her newborn daughter for the first time, her tiny hands gripping Emily's finger with surprising strength. In that instant, the world seemed to shrink, narrowing to just the two of them. Tears streamed down Emily's face, not from exhaustion or pain, but from the overwhelming sense of renewal Lily brought with her. She looked down at her daughter, a mix of wonder and determination washing over her. Lily wasn't just a new life, she was a new beginning, a symbol of everything Emily had fought for over the past months. James stood nearby, his expression unreadable. He had been supportive in the delivery room, holding her hand through the contractions and whispering words of encouragement. Yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that a wall still stood between them, one that neither of them knew how to tear down. For now, though, she chose to focus on Lily. This tiny, perfect being had given her a clarity she hadn't known was possible. As she cradled her daughter, Emily silently vowed to be the kind of mother Lily could look up to, strong, kind, and unshakably self-assured. In the weeks that followed, Emily discovered a well of strength she didn't know she possessed. Late nights rocking Lily to sleep, early mornings preparing bottles, and countless hours spent simply marveling at her daughter's every movement. All of it filled Emily with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Motherhood wasn't just a role, it was a calling, one that demanded every ounce of her energy and heart. And yet, it was through this demanding new chapter that Emily began to rediscover herself. Every smile from Lily, every coo and giggle, reminded her of why she had fought so hard to reclaim her life. As the days turned into weeks, Emily started to share snippets of her journey online. What began as short posts about her experiences with motherhood and self-discovery soon blossomed into something much bigger. Her words resonated with other women, mothers, daughters, sisters, who saw their own struggles mirrored in hers. "You're so brave," one comment read. "Thank you for sharing this. It's exactly what I needed to hear." The messages poured in, filling Emily with a sense of connection she hadn't felt in a long time. Slowly, she realized that her story wasn't just hers. It was part of something larger. James began to notice the change in Emily as her confidence grew. She was no longer the quiet, hesitant woman who second-guessed herself at every turn. Instead, she spoke with conviction, her words carrying a weight that even James couldn't ignore. He watched as her online posts gained traction, her audience growing with each passing week. Emily had found her voice and people were listening. "You're really making an impact," James said one evening, his tone a mix of admiration and uncertainty. Emily nodded, her focus on Lily as she rocked her gently to sleep. "It's not about the impact," she replied softly. "It's about the message." For Emily, the blog became more than an outlet. It was a mission. She wanted to show other women that they weren't alone, that they had the power to reclaim their lives no matter how far they felt they had fallen. Each post, each interaction became a small victory, reinforcing the truth she had discovered through her journey. Strength comes not from perfection, but from perseverance. Emily wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was living for Lily, and for every woman who needed to hear that their worth was never defined by anyone but themselves. Years had passed, and Emily's life was unrecognizable from what it once was. She stood backstage at a grand auditorium, the sound of murmuring voices filtering through the heavy curtains. The crowd had come to hear her speak, women from all walks of life, eager to be inspired by her story. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself as she adjusted the microphone clipped to her blouse. Beside her stood Lily, now a spirited young girl with her mother's determined gaze. Emily glanced down at her daughter, who squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You've got this, Mom," Lily said, her voice brimming with pride. As the announcer introduced her, the applause swelled, a thunderous wave that filled the room. Emily stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The lights were blinding at first, but she quickly found her focus. The faces in the crowd, eager and expectant. She began to speak, her voice steady and warm. She told them about her journey, about the pain, the doubt, and the moments when she thought she wouldn't make it. But more importantly, she shared the lessons she had learned, that strength is found in vulnerability, that self-worth is non-negotiable, and that every woman has the power to rewrite her story. As Emily's words flowed, she could see the impact they had. Women in the audience nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears, others leaning forward as if to absorb every word. She spoke of the night she stood in front of the mirror, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. She described the moment she decided to take control of her life, not for anyone else, but for herself and her daughter. And she shared how those small, hesitant steps had led her to this very stage, where she now stood as a testament to resilience and transformation. James sat near the back of the room, almost hidden among the sea of faces. It was the first time he had seen Emily in years, and the sight of her standing tall and commanding the room was both humbling and bittersweet. He had been following her journey from a distance, watching as her blog grew into a movement, and her name became synonymous with empowerment. Seeing her now, he felt a mix of pride and regret, a recognition of the incredible woman she had become, and an ache for the role he had played in her struggles. For the first time, James truly understood the depth of her strength. When the speech ended, the applause was deafening. Women lined up to meet Emily, to thank her, to share their own stories of courage and transformation. She greeted each one with genuine warmth, her words of encouragement flowing easily. Amidst the crowd, James approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. When Emily saw him, her expression softened, but there was no hesitation in her demeanor. "Emily," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." She studied him for a moment, her gaze steady but kind. "Thank you," she replied simply. "But this journey, it was mine to take." James nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning behind her words. She had forgiven him, not to rebuild their relationship, but to free herself from the weight of the past. It wasn't about reconciliation, it was about closure. As James walked away, Emily felt a sense of peace. She turned back to the crowd, her focus now entirely on the women who had come to hear her story. With Lily by her side, Emily knew that her mission was far from over. She had found her purpose, and she was ready to continue sharing it with the world. The stage lights dimmed, casting a soft glow over Emily as she stood before a sea of captivated faces. She held the microphone in one hand, and with the other, she gently gripped Lily's, drawing strength from the presence of her daughter. The final moments of her speech were always the hardest, not because they were emotional, but because they carried the weight of everything she had endured and overcome. As she glanced at the audience, her gaze softened, and she began to speak, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "There was a time," she said, "when I believed my worth was tied to someone else's approval." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her as she continued. "I lived in fear, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of losing myself entirely. But then, something remarkable happened. I realized that my strength didn't come from what others thought of me. It came from within. It was there all along, waiting for me to see it, to embrace it." She paused, her words hanging in the air like a bridge connecting her story to the hearts of those listening. "And I'm here to tell you that no matter how lost you feel, no matter how broken, you are capable of extraordinary things." As the applause began to swell, Emily smiled and looked down at Lily, who beamed back up at her. "This journey wasn't just for me," she continued, her voice rising above the clapping hands. "It was for my daughter, for the life I wanted her to see me living, for the example I wanted to set, and it was for every woman who has ever doubted her own strength." The room erupted in cheers, but Emily held up a hand, signaling for quiet. She wasn't done yet. "But let me be clear," she said, her tone firm yet compassionate. "This isn't about perfection. It's about progress. It's about choosing every single day to show up for yourself, even when it's hard." In the back of the room, James watched silently, his heart heavy yet strangely light. He had thought long and hard before attending this event, unsure if his presence would be welcomed or resented. Now, as he watched Emily standing tall, her voice resonating with power and grace, he realized something profound. Her journey had nothing to do with him anymore. It was hers, and it always had been. He felt a pang of regret for the man he had been, but also a sense of gratitude for the woman Emily had become. He knew he had lost the right to be part of her life, but he also knew she had found her own way forward. As the evening drew to a close, Emily opened the floor for questions. A young woman stood, her voice trembling as she spoke. "How did you forgive the people who hurt you?" she asked. Emily nodded, understanding the depth of the question. "Forgiveness," she began, "isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they've done. I forgave not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness allowed me to move forward without carrying the bitterness that could have held me back." The young woman nodded, her eyes glistening with tears, and Emily offered her a warm smile. When the event ended, Emily and Lily stood together at the edge of the stage, soaking in the moment. Lily looked up at her mother with wide, admiring eyes. "Mom," she said, her voice filled with awe, "you're so brave." Emily crouched down, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "And so are you," she whispered. As they left the auditorium, hand in hand, Emily felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had found her voice, her purpose, and most importantly, her peace. The journey had been long and painful, but it had shaped her into the woman she was today, a woman who knew her worth, who had forgiven the past, and who was ready to face the future with open arms. Thank you for being part of Emily's journey today. Stories like hers remind us that no matter how tough life gets, there is always a way to rise, to heal, and to grow. But now, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching this from? What city? What country? Share your thoughts, your stories, because we're all connected by our experiences. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Together, we can continue to share these journeys, inspire one another, and remind ourselves of the strength we carry every day. Until next time, stay strong and keep believing in yourself. You've got this.